All right, welcome to this week's topic, social influence, and we will talk about tons of really exciting stuff. And I want to give you in the beginning a little brief overview. We start with trying to understand the power of social norms, where we behave in ways without anyone asking us, without basically any pressure put on us, but we kind of conform to the norms around us. Garfinkel, a sociologist in the 1960s, did a series of experiments who are called breach experiments. They're obviously not experiments because he's a sociologist, but they're trying to make us aware, especially as students, of the power of the social norms, the little rules that guide every interaction we have. So in one setting, he would ask the students to go home and behave as lodgers at their parents' home. And you can have to stay tuned to the next chapter into today's session to learn what happens. And another one, he asked basically to his students to question underlying assumptions that we have when we communicate. So for instance, if I would come to you and I would ask you, how are you? Then you could respond, well, what do you mean? My physical or mental well-being or financially maybe? Do you mean right now in the moment, in a very, very moment? More today, more over the week? What do you mean, right? And you can see immediately that we have certain convention norms and rules that guide these interactions. And what happens is that people get really outraged when we kind of violate them. This is our starting point. And then we ask for some more obscure behaviors or some more interesting stuff. We ask, okay, what happens, for instance, if I invited you to a experiment, and in this experiment you would see here on the left a line, the X line. You ask which of these lines, A, B, or C, has the same length as X. You would say, like, obviously it's B, and you're about to say it out when everyone else in your group says C. And then you look like this person in the middle who is the participant, and you wonder, why C? Am I wrong or not? And we will see how participants respond to that and what the conditions are where they maybe go with C or stick to their initial judgment. So this is the topic of our first section on norms and conformity and conforming to norms. We will also wonder thereafter when the majority dominates the minority, forces them into conformity, and when the opposite happens, how can minority assert themselves? How can smaller groups in a society make sure that they are heard and that their opinions are taken serious? So we talk about majority influence on the minority, but we also talk about minority influence on the majority. Thereafter, we go from conformity to compliance. What if I ask you something that is really outrageous? So here in this experiment that we will start the compliance section, there's an experimenter. Let's imagine you come to me to do an experiment, and you would come into the room and you would sit down and say, before we can start the experiment, can you please give me your phone and your coat, because I want to look something up on your phone in the room next door. Would you do it? How many of the 103 participants would comply to this behavior? And this is the third and fourth section we have today is about compliance. When I ask something directly, is it more or less likely, and which condition is more or less likely that I comply with these asks? And how can I use these tactics to sell you more ShamWows, fantastic towel made in Germany that works for wet and dry surfaces? Amazing. How can I use the techniques we discussed to sell you more of these? And then the last one, we talk about obedience, a little bit more serious. You're probably familiar with this experiment by Milgram. When people are asked to obey a command to hurt another person, are they blindly following? Are they obedient or not? Who is not, under which conditions? And that will end our section on social influence. One thing we will not talk about is automatic mimicry. You can think of this as the lowest level of social influence. So you can observe that by yourself, that if we are in a room with other people, we automatically, unconsciously mimic their behaviors. So on the right side, this is one of the experiments where basically you would have a person sitting in a room, cross their legs, and then you would observe how often it is, if the person is in the room, that the participant also crosses their legs. And if the person is not in a room, how often do they cross their legs? things. And what you can see is that there's basically this really strong connection between how others behave, their emotions, just kind of in the room, and we mimic them in order to get attuned to those. We don't talk about this. Here's Tanya Chartrand is the person to consult if you're more interested in this kind of nonverbal behavior and how it facilitates social interactions. But that is basically the lowest form of social influence on our nonverbal behavior. Have fun.